I'm Jake.
I'm Tom.
We are Velocities in Music. This is part 3 of the Radiohead Artist Deep Dive Tripodcast. In which Tom and I go through Radiohead's discography. And we would only do this if we had a very good reason. Mm-hmm. Because, admittedly, Radiohead is my favorite band. One of my favorite bands.
Yep.
And so a lot of me talking about Radiohead, and I'm sure, Tom, you can probably relate to some of this, is just me gushing about how awesome they are. I've tried to limit that in the last 2 podcasts of the first podcast that we did, which was Pablo Honey, The Bends, and OK Computer, and the second, which was Kid A through the King of Limbs in 2011. So really the Radiohead's 90s work, Radiohead's 2000s work, and then this third part is we're going to cover Radiohead's 9th record, which was just released on May 8th, 2016, A Moon-Shaped Pool. Now, before we get started, there is something that you guys have to know about Tom and my relationship before
Is this something I know about our relationship?
Oh, it is. But if you've listened to part 2 where we talked about In Rainbows, In Rainbows was a very tenuous subject between us for many years. And I feel like we finally worked it out in 2011 when we officially reviewed it on VIMTV. And since then we've been living in harmony.
Yes.
When it comes to Radiohead, but we have not talked about a Moon-Shaped Pool once,
which is difficult because King of Limbs and In Rainbows, we were talking about in depth within hours of when the albums were released.
Yes.
Now it's been 2 or 3 weeks, and we have not talked about this.
It's been 2 weeks today.
Oh, 2 weeks to the day. Yeah,
2 weeks today.
Right.
It came out, and
it already feels like longer.
It does, and I think part of that's because I've literally listened to this thing. I wouldn't be surprised if I've hit 30 listens.
Really? All right.
I would not be surprised.
I'm at least a dozen, but probably not 20.
And I have to say, I've listened to it that many times because it's taken me that long to wrap my head around it. Mm-hmm. It's taken me that long to wrap my head around it. I have not had this much trouble understanding a Radiohead record ever.
Yeah, that's fair.
Other than just learning. I mean, I kind of feel like when I was first getting into Radiohead, you were just learning what the hell is this band, especially going from loving pop punk and Dashboard Confessional, and then to my first taste of good music, which was Kid A. Just learning all the things about Radiohead and learning how to listen to music that is actually meant to be listened to and understood at both an emotional and intellectual level. Radiohead is all of those things, right? And Moon-Shaped Pool, I think, is no different. And it's probably the toughest record in my experience to understand.
Yeah.
So having never talked about A Moon-Shaped Pool, Tom, I gotta know, do you like it?
I'm on the edge of my seat, man. I don't know what you think.
I don't know what I think either.
I could just toy with you so bad right now.
Totally could.
No, I'm not going to do that. That's cruel.
I know that I will say this. Mm-hmm. I know that I like this record.
Yeah.
I know that I really like it.
Yeah.
And there's a number of things that I want to talk about and get into.
Yeah.
But this has been a challenging record for me. Because I think that a lot of people are just loving A Moon-Shaped Pool. They're saying it's just a Radiohead classic. I'm not ready to go there yet. I'm also not ready to rank it with all the rest. I tried, but I don't think that that's fair to rank it with Radiohead's
They almost
other
feel
work.
like a different band.
They do feel like a different band.
It's
and that's what I love
different.
about it. But isn't that the most Radiohead thing
right?
To
I was
going
to say, but then again, when have they ever really repeated themselves between albums?
Yes.
So you're always comparing apples to oranges within their discography.
Especially in the post being signed to a record company days, so the last 3 albums in Rainbows to The King of Limbs and now A Moon-Shaped Pool, these guys are trying to flip the table every single time they release.
Yeah.
Trying to flip the table every single time. In Rainbows they were going to just focus on melody and emotion, strip everything out. Yeah. King of Limbs was all about rhythm and looping, and this album, I don't know what the hell it's about.
Well, I'll tell you what, there's one thing that this album is really missing. And that's a hyphen in the title.
But we can definitely agree on that.
Yes, we can agree on that. There needs to be a damn hyphen between moon and shape.
I think I tried to ask you this. Do you like it? Do you know if you like this album or not?
This album?
Yeah.
I really like it.
You do?
I do.
Okay, so we can get that out of your
So we
chest.
can get that out of the way.
So I definitely really like it too.
Okay.
I'm trying to understand why I really like
it.
And I don't fully ascertain how much I like it.
Sure.
And that hasn't been decided yet, but I know I really like it.
Yes.
And that's about as far as I've made it. Now,
Right.
I will go into why. We will obviously both go into why we feel this way. But just to break the ice, Tom, since I've been like dying to know if you just
I
hate
know,
this thing
same- no,
because you
same
hated
here.
In Rainbows. You
Yeah,
hated
that's
In
true.
And at first, I kind of thought this sounded like In Rainbows, and I'm actually going to get on a soapbox at some point during this podcast and talk about how this is absolutely not like In Rainbows. This album is unlike anything Radiohead's ever done.
Yeah,
you can find similarities, like with all of Radiohead's records since Hail to the Thief, and including Hail to the Thief. You can find records of where, like this part of the sound really reminds me of this song on this album. You certainly can do that throughout a Moonshaped Pool, and In Rainbows will come up in that conversation.
I think you're right. I think that in sheer like mood, the closest thing that they've done to this is In Rainbows. But the way that they achieve that mood is completely different. Really?
I'm going to disagree with you.
Okay. What would you say then?
Because when I listen to a Moonshaped Pool, I get depressed.
Really?
The more that I've listened to this, the more depressed I become.
Oh.
And I listen to this thing once a day at least.
Yeah.
And I like when I'm listening to it, I find that I'm more anxious. I'm a less fun person to be around.
Wow.
I actually like get very somber and very into the music.
Yeah.
And like I said, that's what makes Radiohead so special. It's why they're my favorite band. Is that like I have emotional and physical reactions to listening to their music, and I absolutely have that with the Moonshaped Pool, and it's not a positive reaction.
That's interesting. I don't get that at all.
So
I really don't.
And I will go into why. I'll totally dive into why. You know me, Tom. You know me better than anybody.
Yeah.
Maybe except my wife.
Yeah.
Which is kind of creepy when you say it like that. But
hey,
you really
said
do.
it. You said it
You
like
really
that.
do. The amount of time we have spent talking about personal things, in either on camera or for microphone that we've published on the internet is just out of this world. So you know, and actually most of you out there probably know more about me than I know about myself at this point. But like, I gotta say, like I had when I realized that I was having these emotional reactions to listening to a Moonshaped Pool, I had to dive into why. It was like a puzzle I had to solve. I had to figure it out. To deconstruct the album. What are they doing and why are they doing it that is causing me to feel like this? Because I hate this feeling. I hate feeling despair.
Absolutely.
And that is the way I feel. I get that people are gonna compare it to In Rainbows. I'm gonna go on a soapbox. I'm not necessarily ready to do it yet because I think we have to go through the album first as to why this album is not like In Rainbows. But fundamentally, In Rainbows has a sense of optimism to it.
Yeah.
When we were talking through that in the last podcast, in that part of the deep dive, I remember saying that like it was about this relationship, but you knew it was going to be okay. Mm-hmm. The relationship didn't go okay. It fell apart, and this is the aftermath. This is like a Moonshaped Pool. If you've ever been dumped, this is that feeling you have the week after, where you can think about nothing else, about the absolute despair. You've never felt so low, and they captured it on recording. Now it's not like that, but to me, in its entirety. But to me, that's the vibe that I get, and that's why like I get anxious and depressed when I listen to this.
Let me know if this makes sense, because what I think this album sounds like more than any other Radiohead album is the also Nigel Godrich produced Beck's Sea Change.
I am so glad you brought that up.
Another breakup album,
yes,
with a very similar sound aesthetic.
Yes, I'm so glad you brought that up because I actually think that this album is closer to Sea Change or even Morning Phase, but mostly Sea Change than any other record that you could compare it to.
I completely agree.
That's awesome.
All right, 1 for 1.
1 for 1 here. But I gotta say, like to get to sum up like my just overall thoughts of what they're doing here. This album is about like their major, like in every Radiohead album you have a sonic theme that you can kind of identify with, a sonic descriptor. The Bends was all about that guitar attack. OK Computer was about redefining how you play guitar and that alienation feeling of just how like just the criticism of modern society. Kid A was about love and death and doing it through that just horribly obscure electronic sound. Amnesiac, same thing, right? Part of the Kid A sessions. Hail to the Thief was kind of their fun album that was an amalgamation of everything that they've done before. In Rainbows was that infidelity and that pure raw emotion stemming from Tom's vocals. The King of Limbs, it was all about that rhythm, that that infectious rhythm and looping that made you just break into dance. That like every Radiohead album has like a very, very, very high level musical theme. This one is strings. This album is Johnny Greenwood's experience as a music producer coming out in the fact that he like they actually recorded a live orchestra on it participates on the majority of the songs on A Moon-Shaped Pool, and it sounds like a soundtrack. It sounds like a soundtrack. First thing that everyone pointed out, this really sounds like a soundtrack. It's very clear that Johnny's influence in the string section is all over this album.
Yeah.
That's absolutely true, but that's only part of it.
Yeah.
That's only part of it, too, because what I noticed on first listen of this record is a lot of the songs kind of washed over me at first.
Oh, yeah.
And I noticed, and because Tom, you and my extensively diving into these records in the past, I knew that was because Tom's vocals are not as prominent on this record.
Sure,
they are buried in the mix, and he's just not pushing his vocals as he normally is.
He's really not.
His vocal melodies are much more subdued. They're much more just within the context of everything that's else going on. They are just one mere element in the very lush composition that is every track on A Moon-Shaped Pool.
Yeah. So the only communication we've had about this album, actually, Jake, is when we were in the middle of our first listen to it, which we weren't listening to it together, but I was listening to it in the car, and here was my first mistake. First listen to this album. No, not only was I listening to it in the car, I was listening to it in the car with my brother John, who hates Radiohead. Like, is that the worst recipe for a first listen to this album?
Yeah, you were setting yourself up for
the only communication we had, and I'm gonna call you out on this. I know this was a private text you sent me, but you sent me a text that just said, "If you like adult contemporary, this is the Radiohead album for you." And I was like, shit. That means they've finally done it.
Can I tell you a secret?
They've buried their distortion pedals.
Can I tell you a secret?
What?
I was fucking with you when I sent you that text.
Oh, really?
Yes, I was.
God damn it!
I was like,
But the thing is,
I was exaggerating. I mean, like, you could make that criticism. That's an unfair criticism to make.
But where I was at in the album and how I was feeling that day, listening to it, a cursory listen in the car, it actually made sense.
So that, and I knew. See, you had told me that's how you were going to listen to it.
Yeah.
So I having listened to it that much and knowing how we've been making fun of adult contemporary music lately, I knew that if I sent you that text, you because I was like, at first, like on first listen, I was like, this kind of sounds like In Rainbows. Like, Tom's gonna hate it. It was the first thing I thought about A Moon-Shaped Pool.
You got me good, man.
And so I sent you that text to literally just egg you on.
Okay, all right. Well, you did it. That was funny.
And then the next day was Monday, and we were at work, and we agreed not to talk about it until now.
Yes, exactly.
That's funny.
So now breaking the silence. So first listen, first two listens were in the car, which was just worthless. Just a terrible idea. Third, in general, third listen was my first listen on headphones, and I was like, oh my God, this is how you're supposed to listen to this.
Yes.
This is there is no point in listening to this quietly in an open room.
Ever.
No. Yeah. If you're going,
this is not an album you put on in a room full of people.
No.
For multiple reasons.
I did listen to it again. So the next 6 listens were all on headphones. I did listen to it again last week on the surround sound in my living room by myself, blaring it.
I bet that sounded awesome.
And that was acceptable. Yeah. That was good. Because I already knew the album by that point. Yeah. And I was by myself. It wasn't just in the background, and I could really focus on how everything sounded out in the open. But really, I feel like this album is meant to be experienced on headphones. And this is when I realized, and Jake, I know we try not to put labels on things. We like for things to be open-ended, but sometimes you have to, and sometimes it can help you to understand and come to grips with something. This is an art rock album.
It absolutely is an art rock.
It just is. And once that clicked with me, I was like, oh, if Tom York had given some kind of public service announcement before the album came out that said, hey, all you rock fans, this is an art rock album. Don't go into it with the frickin' mindset of Kid A or the Bends. Then I probably would have warmed up to it much more quickly.
But you know that In Rainbows is in that same vein.
Oh, absolutely. But here's I think this is even much more art rocky though. Like I listened to
I would agree.
I listened to this like I listened to an Elbow album. I feel like it's closer to that kind of approach. So once I understood that and I listened to it in headphones very detailed, because this album is all about subtleties, and those subtleties don't come out of the mix if you're listening to it quietly or you're listening to it in an open room. the headphones is really where you get that. This is another album where they really strip the songs kind of down to their very core, but then they build back on them with all these fluttering things in the periphery of the mix. You know, you'll have some guitar or piano twinkles, you'll have some kind of moving strings, or maybe even some synths floating around in the side of the mix. But for the most part, it's very much based on acoustic guitar, piano, vocals, kind of in the center of the mix.
And strings.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And the strings play a prominent role on several of the tracks.
They bring in a lot of subtle synthesizers here and there, just little electronic melodies, but they never fully take over. So getting into the music.
Sure.
And the best way to get into the music for A Moon-Shaped Pool is to talk about the first two singles that came out, because they just happen to be the first two tracks on the album. Oh, and by the way, this is Radiohead's third longest record, just short of OK Computer, and a few minutes shorter than Hail the Thief, which had 14 tracks. As Tom and I said in that podcast, probably could have cut a couple of those out. So A Moon-Shaped Pool is 52 and a half minutes long. And consists of 11 tracks. So, interestingly enough, the first two tracks on the album were released as singles in the week coming up to the release of the record. And then the other thing that you have to take in mind when reading the track listing is it's in alphabetical order.
Yeah.
Which it's very interesting to me that they did that, because this thing flows like they made it like one fluid listen. Like, I really feel like you could not put these songs in any other order and it would have the same effect.
Yeah.
So that screams a couple of things to me. One, this is a very intentional album. Every single sound you hear was slaved over on this record, which is something that I appreciate. It is absolutely not in the vein of Hail to the Thief or The King of Limbs, where you can just put it on and enjoy it. This is not that. You have to invest yourself into this record to fully understand it and get the benefit from A Moon-Shaped Pool, get the artist design benefit. So Burn the Witch came out about a week before the album was dropped, earlier that week. And I hated Burn the Witch when I first heard it.
I remember that.
I hated it because what I heard was a little electronic beat and the pulsing strings, and then Tom's vocals, and I connect to Radiohead through Tom's vocals, and Tom's vocals, probably his most powerful vocal part on the entire album of A Moon-Shaped Pool is on Burn the Witch, in the chorus. He's really not emoting that much in that. It's just kind of a sing-song song. And I believe Burn the Witch was written during the Hail to the Thief sessions. And
in fact, it's worth saying most of these tracks, I think all but like 3 had been written before.
Yes, I'm glad you brought that up. I want to get into that later.
Okay.
I definitely want to cover that. So anyways, Burn the Witch, it's a very simple song. Like most of the songs that were written during Hail to the Thief, it's just verse, chorus, verse, chorus. That's all it is.
Yeah.
And then at the very end, the strings kind of get really intense. And if you see the video is freaking awesome. It's a stop motion video where they essentially are burning this guy inside of a Trojan robot, wooden Trojan robot.
Wicker Man.
Yeah, Wicker Man. And so that, like, the video was cool, and I listened to that song a whole bunch, and it was funny because I believe that I can't remember when that song was released. It was like a week before the album came out, but I listened to that song over and over again, and everyone was loving it. I'm like, what are you guys loving? This sucks. This sucks. And then I remember, like, the day that Daydreaming came out, so the album was released Sunday the 8th. The video for Daydreaming was released on Friday the 6th. And so I remember, like, the day that came out, I remember Burn the Witch just clicked with me. And I was like, holy shit, this is really, really good. I could not get it out of my head. I wanted to listen to it over and over again, and I couldn't explain why. I still kind of don't know, to be honest with you, which is probably why I've listened to the albums.
Well, I think a lot of it is I find myself almost never liking pre-release singles off of albums. In fact, a lot of times I try to avoid them because, but with Radiohead, you can't really stay away from the hype. You want to listen to it. But outside of the context of the albums, I find myself not liking individual tracks that much when I don't understand the context of how they fit into an album. So I was kind of with you, Jake. Like, I think I liked Burn the Witch more than you, but I wasn't enamored with it. But by the time A Moon-Shaped Pool came out and I got to know the album, I love it as an opening track.
It's a perfect opening track. It wouldn't fit anywhere else in the album.
Right. It's
obviously
great
because it's titled with a B.
Right. And then Daydreaming as the second track and also the second single.
What did you think of that? We haven't talked about that.
I loved that song even as a single, though.
Me
like,
too.
It was terrific. And that song I still absolutely love. Once again, kind of this like twinkling piano thing, but it's very morose.
Yeah, this very minor key piano triplet that's played over and over again
and
slowly.
In the middle of the song, it just shifts, but then it comes back in with the original vocal melody. And that build at the end with the kind of backwards vocals and then the string flourishes that match
the very
those vocals. This song is great. It plays more like a Sigur Rós track.
It really does. That's a very good point.
That Radiohead had done.
I think Tom's vocal melodies are absolutely stunning in Daydreaming.
Yeah.
He doesn't belt it out. It's very restrained. Everything about Tom's vocals on A Moon-Shaped Pool is very restrained. And I remember putting this on the first time, and it came out with a video where Tom's just walking through all these doors, and he ends up on a mountain in a cave, and then he's just like laying down, and he's just sideways head like talking to you in reverse. The video is very moving, I would say, but the video is moving because the song is moving. Part of the verse, which it pops into these little, I wouldn't call them choruses, but they act as choruses because it's like a more like the verses are very that piano part that's just playing over and over again, and then Tom singing on top of it. But then the verses get very optimistic sounding. But then it goes back into that part just for a second. And then it goes back into the verse part. The third verse, I think it's the third verse, they do like this subtle electronic melody comes in to mimic the piano. And it is... like I get chills every single time I hear it. Just the way that was, it's so detailed, it's so staccatoed, and it's so well produced because it's mixed just low enough that it's quiet and it's only backing the piano, and it just creates this whole other range of emotions, and it just perfectly shows Radiohead's just insane ability to just do these little subtle craft. Twitches into their songs that change the meaning of their song, that make it something so much more than just an average song. This is what makes Radiohead great, people. The fact that they can identify when and where they need to add these little flourishes that make their music so special. No other band does this. No other band does this. And I can't not love this band because of that. That's what makes them so good. These guys are writing music, they've been doing this, like Tom's 46 years old. They've been doing this since they were like 18, 19 years old. It's crazy that they're still together, still making great music and so professional about it. And Daydreaming is a perfect example as to just the perfection in songwriting that this band has achieved. So I had listened to that song probably, and I realized then that I needed to listen to Daydreaming in headphones alone. I couldn't be distracted because there's just too much subtlety going on there. And I should have known then, I didn't, I should have known then that that's what the rest of the album was going to be like. If you really want to understand this record, you had to listen to it in a very detailed manner and look for the subtleties, because that's the codex for see what I did there?
Yeah.
That's the codex for understanding everything about A Moon-Shaped Pool. So you get the album on Sunday, May 8th, put it on. You've already heard Burn the Witch. You've already heard Daydreaming, and you're like, oh yeah, it makes sense. It's cool. Probably the first thing that you noticed was those two songs were on the album. The second thing we'll save for later. But then you go into Dex Dark, and I remember listening to this the first time, and it's just an incredible, incredible song.
Yeah, I really like this one too. It comes in and it kind of from the energy that Burn the Witch had, and then the emotional potency that Daydreaming had. Dex Dark doesn't quite have either of those, but it's a good come down. It just comes in with a very kind of simple and confident like piano and drums, and Tom's vocals I find in this track are very memorable. He presents them perfectly. in the sense that, whereas on Daydreaming he sounds very vulnerable and kind of weak, Dex Dark he sounds a little more confident, a little more authoritative, and he's the vocal melody in this song I just find to be extremely memorable.
It's wonderful. It just sticks in your head. It has a nice groove to it. There's also like the guitar in this song, while while kind of clean and minimalistic sounding in true in Rainbow's fashion. I'm guessing making a counterpoint to my own argument, that it really just drives the song forward, but it gives it just that little bit of rock edge that I like.
Yeah.
And then the sea change-esque strings come in. Holy shit. Man, does that just add a ton of emotional impact towards the end. It sounds so lush, so just absolutely exploding out of its own skin. Tom, you're bobbing your head to it about it.
You're absolutely right. I've got it in my head, the end there when those guitar hits come in with the delay.
It's great.
And then the strings come. Yeah, it's that song ends really strongly, and it really helps to justify the first half that builds into it.
I gotta say that Dex Dark has become one of my favorite tracks on the record. And it's interesting when we get through all the tracks, I want to talk about like what your favorite tracks are and what mine are as well, and then maybe list them out because a lot of people are fixating on Dex Dark. It's one of the most popular like favorite songs from this album, from what I've read, and I totally get why. Moving on from there, you have track 4, Desert Island Disc. What did you think about this song, Tom?
I love when they introduced the acoustic guitar right in the beginning. And there's a great transition from Dex Dark into the beginning of Desert Island Disc. Point. The acoustic guitar comes in, and I love this kind of finger-picked, like it's really the closest thing to gagging order that I've heard them do, with the almost Nick Drake style kind of finger-plucked acoustic. And they still have these kind of like dreamy synths going on in at the sides of the mix, but really the focus is on that front and center acoustic guitar. Tom's vocal melody comes in, and the song once again kind of builds, and by the end of the song, there's a little bit more life, a little bit more energy, and that's something that I feel like is a trait throughout most of these songs on the album.
They all build just a little bit.
They all build just a little bit, but the reason for that, the thing that facilitates that, is that this album, I feel, almost more than any, except maybe Kid A, just tends to avoid the verse-chorus structure. You'll even have like repetitions now and then.
With the exception of Burn the Witch. That's
right,
accurate.
as the first track. Yeah. But even like, like Dex Dark, like there's a line, there's a part of the song that repeats later, but I'd hesitate to call it a chorus, because it's more like Tom is just bringing back the lyrical themes.
Right.
The rest of the structure is not really the same. So it has much more of a free-form feel, which I think is why I call it more of an art rock. Not just in, that's not just in the sound palette, but it's also in the way that they're constructing these songs. I think Desert Island Disc is one of those songs too, is that its identity is nailed down right away by that acoustic guitar. But then where they take it, where the song evolves, becomes something a little bit bigger. And so really you have, I would even say similar to Dex Dark, you have another song that almost is kind of amphibious. You have 2 lives within the song. You have the first half and the second half. But they're able to do that within a pretty short time frame, which I think is really impressive. From shutdown, from 1,000 years of sleep. Yeah, you know what I mean. You know what I mean.
Yeah, it's one of the shortest songs on the album. That and Glass Eyes are some of the shorter tracks. The next song, Full Stop, is a longer track. It's a little over 6 minutes long. Funny thing about, really quick, since we're talking about track lengths, Daydreaming is actually Radiohead's longest song on an album by 1 second. It beats out Paranoid Android. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
I thought it was great. Totally. I love that they were willing to let that song reach that length, because I feel like it's fully justified.
It's interesting, too, because compare that to Paranoid Android, where Paranoid Android covers so much ground technically. Daydreaming covers a lot of ground emotionally, but does so by focusing on really just a couple of motifs that they just extend out.
Yeah, extend out and really build.
Right.
With subtle songwriting flourishes. Speaking of building and subtle songwriting flourishes, track 5, Full Stop, is exactly that. It is. It starts off, it's really a driving bass rhythm is what you hear. But this song has been labeled as krautrock.
Yeah.
What was your take on this track?
This track, first time I heard it, I was like, oh, this is going somewhere cool, and I feel like it kind of built to nothing. I feel a little bit differently about that now.
Okay.
I still almost wish that they would have gone a bit higher dynamically.
I totally agree with you.
Like I almost just wanted some of like the fuzz bass from Exit Music, like coming in at the end or something. But still, from a rhythmic standpoint, I love what they do with just the kind of hypnotic, like entrancing beat. The way they build that. I also love Tom's kind of irregular vocal presentation in this song. It feels a little bit disconnected and a little maniacal at times. But this song grew on me. I still, once again, I still wish they could have kicked it up a notch, just because this album, especially right in the middle of the album, I feel like it needs a higher dynamic.
Yep.
And this almost gets there, but not quite.
Yep, I absolutely agree with you. I feel like they could have kicked it up like 15 more %, and it would have been absolutely perfect. I do feel like Full Stop is really doesn't reach its full potential.
Yeah.
It's still a great track, don't get me wrong. It's just probably, for it to have been one of my favorites on the album, it would have had to have reached that level. And I think that it wouldn't have affected the listening experience had it made it to that level, because it transitions, and I think purposefully so, into Glass Eyes, one of the few original tracks between Daydreaming and Glass Eyes, and then Tinker Tailor Soldier, which we'll talk about later on the album. But Glass Eyes is kind of an interesting song. The first 40 or so seconds of Glass Eyes are all instrumental. So coming off of this big builder track of Full Stop, you then have Glass Eyes, which opens up in this with this, like, it's clearly piano, but it sounds not distorted's the wrong word, contorted. It sounds underwater.
It sounds like low bit rate. Like they recorded the piano, bounced it down to a low quality MP3 file almost, and then tweaked with it some more. Like that weird kind of corruption that you get in those kinds of like sound files. It's an interesting choice, and I actually really like that.
Well,
it adds also, a lot of...
I do too. It's one of those great flourishes. This this song in particular, Glass Eyes, but really throughout this entire album, you hear little production flourishes like that. This album is all about the production. It wouldn't have been as high quality without a lot of the production tricks that Nigel and the band used. And so you start off with that obscure piano sound, and then it builds in some really beautiful strings. I mean, this song is probably one of the most austere, beautiful pieces of music that Radiohead's written. And then it kind of all just fades away and goes down to just very subtle, like low strings, and Tom's vocals come in, and it's a different sort of lyrical style that he approaches. Hey, it's me, I just got off the train, and it's very personal, like he's writing a letter to somebody.
Autobiographical, which you don't. Tom he writes in the first and second person a lot throughout their discography, but it never truly feels like he's singing about himself.
Whereas here he's saying words album, like me,
right.
Yep.
On this album and this song in particular, it is much more, you get the sense like he is himself in this song, and he is singing to you straight what he's experiencing.
Yep. This song kind of continues on. It's only 2 minutes and 53 seconds long. One of the it actually is the shortest song on the record. But it is right in the center of the record, and it's clearly positioned there to provide that before and after sort of transition point. And in that, this is it operates kind of as this very sweet, austere ballad. Tom's vocals really add a flourish towards the end. He just has a very nice vocal melody that's backed by some growing string parts, and it just finishes the song off very nice.
Track 7, Identikit. This is once again a song that they'd had around for a while and chose to, produce up and get ready for this album. This song I really like because it has a lot more life to it than a lot of the songs that came before it.
Yeah, a lot of the songs that came before it either like had one or two dimensions to them, and that's it. This song really has multiple.
Yeah, it starts out with a nice strong beat. Pretty classic Radiohead, I would say, but this is also, I hesitate to say the most, but one of the most strong guitar songs on this album.
Oh, absolutely.
And this is where you actually get a hint of that kind of distortion at the end. Like it sounds like they're just kind of soloing over it in the left channel with some strong guitar. But you also have a nice kind of like bass and guitar groove come right away in the beginning. And then Tom's vocals come in and it just sounds like this drunk meandering that's all reverbed out, just kind of jumping around the mix. But I actually really like that because it leads into the core of the song really well. It kind of gives you a preview of what the vocal melodies will be like, but in kind of like a ghostly foreshadowing way. And then you get to the Broken Hearts Make It Rain bit, which is
chorus.
Really, really strong there right in the middle. Then you have this like kind of piercing synth, like very synthy, just come right in the middle.
Like right when that synth part starts, it's like the trippiest that you've heard. It's like it's trippier than anything on the King of Limbs, which is saying something because it sounds like that they were on drugs when they wrote that record. But like it's just swirling synths and it just builds and builds and builds. And Johnny's guitar starts to come in at the end or in the middle of the synth swirlings. But then at the end when you have Johnny's guitar part, this song ends in like an almost Police-esque like new wave guitar solo.
I would say Police is an accurate comparison. Yeah.
It's just an incredible journey from the beginning of Identikit to the end. I gotta say, when I first listened to Identikit, I hated it.
Oh, really?
I really did not like this song. I was like, what are they doing? The Broken Hearts Make It Rain chorus I didn't like. The only part I liked was the guitar solo at the end. But then I started listening to the lyrics. I started falling in love with Tom's vocal melodies. That synth swirling build up in the bridge area really caught my ear. And now it's one of my favorite tracks on the record. Every track's one of my favorite tracks on the record, I feel like. Except for the next one, The Numbers.
Really?
Let's talk about The Numbers, yeah.
This is one of my favorite songs on here.
Well, how would you describe it?
I feel like it's a good return to kind of the more rock sound. And it's also one where by the end, the kind of sweeping synths calls more to that like Beck C change, with the Serge Gainsbourg influence on the string arrangement. But I love the bass line in this one. The bass line is very prominent, but also this song is more acoustic guitar based with some piano flourishes that come in and support things. I like the full band feel that this has though, and I like the way it builds. This is, as we said, the most Sea Change-esque song on this album.
It feels like
that's where the comparison hit home for me. So I was like, oh, Sea Change. Okay, yep. This makes more sense now.
Or even Morning Phase, I'd say.
Right. But this song, I love when it kind of changes to, Tom's vocals when he does the one day at a time line that kind of like fades out into obscurity and reverb. Then it kind of comes back in. I think it's a cool progression. It's also a longer track. But this is where I feel, and this is something I felt very strongly on like third or fourth listen. I don't think it's as much a detriment now, but I still feel like it's present. What I was feeling was that this album is an album that is somehow a little bit weaker than the sum of its parts. And what I mean by that is I think every track on here is pretty good, but I feel like they repeat themselves in sound just a little bit at times. And that's, this is something that I've said several times before, and I'm bound to say it several more times on this podcast, is I think the hardest thing to do in making a good album is finding balance between variety and consistency. You want to make an album. You don't want to make an album that's so consistent every song sounds the same and accomplishes the same thing. You also don't want to make an album that is so has so much variety that none of the songs make sense together. But where's that line in the middle? And I think throughout Radiohead's discography, we've seen a little bit of variation in that spectrum. I would say that like for example, I think like OK Computer nails that balance. All the songs make sense together, but they don't really repeat themselves. I actually think, despite my lack of love for it, In Rainbows, I think is brilliant in that realm, because the songs, you can't pick out any song and say, oh, this song already kind of does that. But yet somehow they all make sense together. By the time I get to particularly the Numbers and Present Tense, these two songs that we're on now, Jake, I feel like individually both of these songs are great and should be, to me, some of the standout songs on the album. But I feel like some of the sounds and some of the approaches we're getting have kind of already been covered.
You I've never thought of that before.
Okay.
And you make a really good point. I just alluded to the fact this isn't one of my favorite tracks on the record.
Sure.
It's not one of my favorite tracks. I still really like it because of all the reasons that you said. A standalone track, it's pretty strong, right?
Yeah.
But like just within context of the rest of the record, I don't feel like it has that much of an impact. Partly because I've already gotten my like major string attack fix multiple times on this record. Now, if you want to transition to the present tense,
sure.
I'm totally ready to do that. Because the present tense to me is the reckoner of this record.
Okay.
It is where like Tom's vocals really take off.
And once again, that finger plucked acoustic guitar comes back in.
Oh,
it's
man.
Great.
And the lyrics are just haunting. I just find the whole experience to just be very, very emotionally overwhelming.
Yeah. When it gets to the last bit and the vocals change to the "You I'm Lost," oh my God, that's a gorgeous movement there at the end of the track.
Yeah, and I feel like that song really packs a lot of the emotional punch that the album has needed since you get off of Daydreaming. You don't have any real like heartbreak emotion. But the rest of the album, that's all there is. So in following the present tense, you have Tinker, Tailor, Soldier, Sailor, Rich Man, Poor Man, Beggar Man, I think is what it's called.
Thief, I think.
Beggar Thief.
Yeah.
I don't actually know what the end of the song title is because it's so long that...
Because no screens are big enough to hold it.
Honestly, like my laptop's only an 11-inch screen, so
yeah,
I think I would have
exactly.
needed a 15-inch screen to view the entire track title. I just call it Tinker Tailor. That has actually become one of my favorite tracks on the record.
Okay.
It has, and I know, like I've actually seen on Reddit, I saw our Radiohead, everyone's voting on like what's their favorite song, and Tinker Tailor is by far the least.
Yeah.
It's become one of my favorites because of how subtle it is. It's a slower song, and its whole purpose is about Tom's vocal melodies and the strings.
Yeah.
That's the whole purpose of the song.
And here's my theory on this. And I bet this is just a hypothesis, this is just speculation, but I see where you're coming from. And see, to me, I have trouble with this track, and it's a fine track. When I listen to it, I like it, but it's not one that I come back to. It's not one that's memorable. It's the one that I have the hardest time just calling to memory and playing in my head off of nothing. And I think it's because of its place in the track listing.
I agree with that.
I think that's the complete problem.
I totally agree with that.
I think that by the time you get to this point in the album, you've been listening to it for almost 50 minutes. I just don't think that song does enough different from the rest of the album to really call it to your attention. That doesn't mean it's a terrible song. I just think, once again, this album...
like the subtlety and production approach... of the album actually backfires a bit.
I think it does a little bit when you have that much quantity of material. Now it's a shame because I don't necessarily feel that song should have been cut. I don't think this needed to be trimmed down, but at a little over 50 minutes, it's a fairly long record, and when you have a decently homogenized sound, I think that usually caters to a bit of a shorter listen.
I actually think that's a really fair point to make. It's a perspective I hadn't considered, and I think you're spot on.
But at the same time, this album wouldn't have been potent if it was like 35 minutes.
No, it wouldn't.
So I think that like maybe 45 minutes ish is a sweet spot, and it's a little long, but at the same time, once again, I like the tracks on here. I don't think that there's a particularly weak track. We talked about Hail to the Thief and picked out some songs we would have removed. I don't feel like I can necessarily do that here, but it just, to me, speaks to larger sequencing and planning issues.
So the last song is track 11, True Love Waits.
Oh, shit.
You ready to talk about True Love Waits?
God. I don't know. Am I? It's tough, man.
So do you like this version of True Love Waits?
So when I first heard it, I was a little disappointed because, I'd gotten attached to the live recording version.
Which one?
The guitar one. What?
No, I understand. I understand.
I'm talking about the one from the live album.
I might be wrong. Okay,
Yeah.
So I actually really don't like that I might be wrong live recording of True Love Waits. I just don't feel like it does the song justice.
That's fair.
You get on YouTube and listen to the first time that they played True Love Waits, you can listen. It's the 1995 recording. I forget which city it was in. But Tom, the first thing he says is, he goes, "This is a new song that nobody's heard before," and then it just goes into the guitar. That, in my opinion, is the ultimate True Love Waits.
Still
version.
a guitar rendition of it.
It is a guitar rendition, but the important thing is that towards the end of the song, in the third chorus, Johnny comes in with synth keys. And it's this beautiful key part that comes in on top of it. And that dichotomy between the acoustic guitar, that just raw acoustic guitar captured well in live form, and then that digitized synth melody is just stunning.
Yeah.
Stunning. And they dropped the synth melody on the I Might Be Wrong recording, and they stripped it down, and you don't hear the crowd noise. Like it defeats the purpose of True Love Waits.
I do remember that version
a live
now.
favorite for 20 years.
Yeah, I remember you showing me that version now. I do recall. So this one, so when I first listened to it, I struggled a bit because I'm so used to hearing the song on guitar anytime I hear it.
I struggle
completely
with the same
different
thing.
presentation because it's piano, and not only is it piano, but it's this kind of irregular, like stumbling arranged piano. But then just a couple listens through it, this song slays me. This song is one of the most moving and just achingly gorgeous things I've ever heard. It almost brings me to tears every single time that I listen to it.
This version.
Yes.
So you love it.
I love it.
Okay. So I've struggled with this one.
Yeah?
Because I love the first version.
Yeah.
You know my wife. Like that song has always been like, I used to write poems to her in high school quoting True Love Waits. Like this song's very personal to me. Mm-hmm. This song is going to launch me into a tangent. Do I have your permission to go into my tangent?
Yeah, dude, do it. We're at the end of the album anyway.
Okay. So this version of True Love Waits is, in my head, a completely separate song from the True Love Waits that we've known the last 21 years. Mm-hmm. It's 2016. The first time they ever played True Love Waits live was in 1995. This song's been around for 21 years, okay? Tom York is 46 years old. And I got to get personal with this. True fandom here. Everything I say henceforth is going to be pure speculation. My fandom just going crazy. None of this this is probably all inaccurate. This is how I've chosen to view this album and Radiohead at this point in 2016. Tom York is 46 years old. He and his partner, I forget her name, I think it's Rachel something, split up in August of 2015. Okay, right after that, they went into the recording studio. Yeah, very very important to note that timeline. On Wikipedia it says they split up amicably. They have two kids who are I think one was born in 2001, one was born in 2004. So they have a history. So keep in mind, earlier we talked about how In Rainbows was all about infidelity. Okay. Mm-hmm. And there was clearly been themes of infidelity throughout a lot of their music. Tom York has written songs in the perspective of like the people that he's with before. This isn't new. This isn't new stuff. Mm-hmm. True Love Waits came out in 1995. 23 years before 2016 would have been about 1993, right when he and his partner were getting together. If you listen to the first version of True Love Waits, there's a sense of desperation in the song. That's what makes it so emotionally potent, is that sense of desperation. But there's also that, like how I described in Rainbows, a sense of optimism there too. It's like they were just like in a fight, and Tom is lamenting about how special this person is and how he wants it to work out. And he sings it as such. If you listen to the intonation in his voice, there's an inherent optimism there. This new version, that optimism is gone. What's left is regret. And when I listen to this new version of True Love Waits, it's slower.
Yeah.
Tom recorded his vocal part slightly differently. And it's more like his vocal melody is more drawn out.
Yeah.
And you hear his voice cracking at times, and they kept that in. They did that intentionally. It just screams to me that like he's reflecting on a time, and like it's like looking back in hindsight on everything that happened and everything that went wrong. To me, this song has always been personal to Tom York, and they've always Radiohead have brought this into the recording studio many times. Kid A sessions, it showed up in the recording studio. If you read Ed's journal entries from the Kid A sessions, he actually talks about how they're working on True Love Waits and it's coming along great. Then it didn't work out because they've always felt like they couldn't capture it without making it sound like a John Mayer song. Which I think is fair. That's a good move by Radiohead. But then so now it finally shows up on an album that is riddled with feelings of despair, of alienation, with oneself, with one's own ego, a sense of losing your place with the world, even though that they're I think the numbers is about global warming. It's still in one's relationship with the world around them, right? Like that's still a theme, even if that song is directly about that. This album isn't about global warming to me, people. This album is about the feelings of despair, of aging and growing up and becoming. There's different kinds of love. Like that's a lyric on this record.
Yeah.
This whole record is about Tom and his partner kind of realizing that things have changed and they're going their separate ways, and capturing that in the studio. And to me, the fact that the word amicably on the Wikipedia article, doesn't that just sum up this album? Just amicable despair.
Yeah. See, you're leading terrifically into something that I've been wanting to say, because when sorry, are you not done?
Well, I just because before I was talking about how when I listen to this record, I get depressed.
Yeah.
And I walk away I'm hard to talk to.
And I want to address that, because you mentioned it that at the beginning, and I was very shocked, because that is not my experience with this album at all. And as it's always been over the last 10 or more years, Jake, when you and I disagree about something musically, I always strive to find understanding. Like where can we meet in the middle? Because it's fine to disagree, but I want to understand why. Because I found my reaction to this album, my experience with it, is that I find it very soothing. I find it very calming. And that is complete opposite from the effect that it has on you. And you mentioned that element of despair in it, and that kind of took me by surprise, because it's I haven't interpreted it that way. And I think I realize why. I've spent this entire time we've been talking in the back of my mind trying to figure out why. I think that the reason is because while there is the element of despair, what I hear from it, and while you mentioned that in Rainbows has that optimism, right? This does not have that optimism.
There's no optimism.
What I think it does have is acceptance.
Yes.
And I think that is what I'm pulling from it.
Yes.
I think that is a powerful, it can still come from a bad experience in a bad place, but that acceptance is a powerful emotion. And you hear that.
It's a complex emotion.
It is, because it's essentially giving yourself to a bad situation and learning to move on.
Yeah.
And trying to, it doesn't sound outwardly or intrinsically optimistic, because you already know that it's ended badly.
Yeah.
But then you're trying to pick yourself up from there.
And that to me is the most terrifying thing ever. So
really? Okay.
So, and I'll explain why. And so this is going to get a bit personal. And
Okay.
if I'm
That's
divulging too much of myself and putting it on the internet, then I apologize if this gets mushy. So I've been married for 6.5 years. I married my true love. I really did. Like my wife and I have a stupendous relationship, and it's always been better than I've always felt it should be. It almost always just felt like we clicked too easy, and I've always just been waiting for like this one day for like everything just end. Now we have a 2.5-year-old son. We have another baby on the way. You know, I have this like what I would consider to be like the perfect life that I love. I love my life. I love everything about it, especially the family that my wife and I have built. And like Tom's story of like how he had a wife and had kids, and then it all fell apart, and amicably being okay to separate, and the feeling of acceptance on this album, that terrifies the shit out of me.
I see what you mean.
It terrifies the shit out of me because I don't want to lose anything that I've built so far. Any of the like these complex relationships that I have with my wife and my kids and my extended family. Like all of this is hugely dynamic and a huge part of my life and who I am as a person. And so like this album takes me into this world where like it just injects the thoughts into my brain and the emotions into my brain that this could end.
Yeah.
And that is the most terrifying thing in the world to me.
That makes perfect sense.
So when I listen to this record and it takes me to that spot, I become insular, I become agitated, I become not somebody that I like being around or anyone else likes being around. And the only person that I'm comfortable listening to this album with is my wife.
Yeah.
Because she gets it too. She understands where I'm coming from. And I've had this conversation with her.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. And now that you put it that way, I think that really sums up the difference between our experiences with this, because you're taking this and you can't help but relate it directly.
I can't.
To your
I'm
where you are in your life.
I'm projecting.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of that is timing too.
Oh, absolutely.
Just where you're at in your life when this album happened to come out. Whereas like for me, I don't know. I guess I haven't really directly related it to my life. I also don't have kids, so that that might play a part in it. Maybe it would be a little more like that if that were my current life situation. But I think part of it too is just when I listen to music, I tend to be more voyeuristic about it. I feel like I'm seeing a window into Tom York's soul and his mind.
Sure.
But that it's not a mirror.
Yeah.
Like I don't see myself in it, I guess.
Yeah.
But
I don't do that.
I just feel like the way that he approaches this though, it is almost spooky, because even the lyrics, and not only the lyrics, but the way that he presents them, the way that he sings them, he's making these assertions.
Yes.
Whereas in the rest of Radiohead's discography, there's always been some element of like questioning or seeking something, right? Here it's more like you've reached the end of a road, and he's just saying like, I'm going to pull some of the lines. Daydreaming, dreamers, they never learn.
Oh my God, that's like one of the best lyrics.
Yeah,
on the record.
the first line of Deck's Dark. In your life comes a darkness. Later on, we are helpless. There are all these moments like that where he just makes these assertions. He's not questioning anything. He's not searching for anything. What he's done is he's kind of stepped outside of himself, and he's making these observations about things that he now knows.
Yes.
There's no question about it.
Yes.
He's telling you this.
Undeniable truths he's learned.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I think that element, you're absolutely right. When you think of it that way, like it is kind of terrifying because there's always that question in our minds that maybe the good things in our life won't work out.
Will come to an end. Isn't that like the biggest fear? Like, like like most people fear some form of dying, right?
Sure.
Loved ones dying or whatnot. Like to me, like I can understand death. I can. I can't understand, like I can't fathom my life without my wife or my family.
Sure.
I just can't. I can't even comprehend what that would be like. And this album forces me to think about that.
Yeah. No, I gotcha. That makes perfect sense, man. Holy crap. This is getting some heavy shit.
Man, aren't you glad we didn't talk about this?
I'm so glad. This is great.
So with that in mind.
Yeah.
With that in mind. Like all of these things, another thing, just to show Radiohead's intention, the video for Daydreaming, Tom walks through 23 doors.
Yeah. God damn those guys.
So
detail-oriented.
So detail-oriented, so intentional about everything. Yeah. It just blows my mind. Mm-hmm. It blows my mind. But to me, that's just supporting evidence in the fact that like this album is like there are hints of that relationship throughout this album. Hints of Love Lost and the acceptance of Love Lost are just covered throughout this album. Yet for some reason people aren't picking up on this.
Yeah.
Yeah. When I read like what people's take on this album is from like a thematic standpoint, they talk about like global warming. I'm sorry, but this album is not about global warming. This album is about relationship. This is personal.
Very personal.
This is an extremely personal record. It pisses me off that people haven't figured this out yet. Because it just shows me that they're not really listening.
No, I would completely agree with that.
And what also pisses me off, and here's my soapbox. Here right, I'm going.
Get up there.
So I have heard there's like this argument that's circulating the interwebs right now about how this is Radiohead's last album. Tom, at the beginning of the recording, you brought up the fact that there's only technically 3 original tracks on this record. Those original tracks are track 2, Daydreaming, track 6, Glass Eyes, and track 10, Tinker Tailor Soldier. I'm sorry, but that whole theory is absolute baloney. It is absolute baloney. I don't think it has any merit. I will eat my own words. I will eat a picture of Tom York if I am wrong about this. Huh? And this is their last record. But I firmly believe this is not. You cannot just draw from the fact that they have a bunch of tracks on here that you heard previously. That this is their last record and they're just airing it out. They're just pulling out the rest of the back.
Yeah, I don't see them phoning it in that way.
They're saying that because True Love Waits shows up on the album, and Identikit, which has been around for a few years. Other tracks, Burn the Witch, is a little ditty, has been around for a few years. They have literally always done this. They've literally always done this. As long as they've been a band, they've been pulling from these little ideas.
Every single album has.
Every album.
In Rainbows, actually, I think, had the most of a lot of it. Because Body Snatchers, Arpeggi, as well as Nude, they'd been playing for a long time.
And they debuted All I Need beforehand. They had played Jigsaw. They had played Videotape. I mean, most of the tracks had been played, and that's what Radiohead does. They take songs that they have kind of worked up, and once they start getting them into a place that they like, they test them live to see how people react to them. They gather feedback like any good band or creator does. They gather feedback and figure out, like, will this actually work? And then if it does, if yes, then hey, maybe we should work on it some more and put it into an album. And if no, then not. We'll save it for later or release it as a B-side. Yeah. That's the path. That's the flow chart for them, right? Like, there's nothing about this album that tells me that they're coming to an end anytime soon. In fact, this might be a new beginning for them, right?
Yeah, I could see it. I could see it being that.
I could totally see them going a totally different direction. I don't think that we've seen the last of the guitar Radiohead. It's totally possible that they could come out and do an acoustic-based album, right? Yeah. The thing is that what we know about Radiohead is they are going to pick a sonic theme, and they're going to stick to that sonic theme and make it an album listening experience. And that is what I love about this band. Sure. And I am fully convinced that we will see another Radiohead album, probably not until the year 2021, but I'm okay with that. I'm willing to wait because I know it will be a masterpiece. And I think A Moon-Shaped Pool is a masterpiece. I do. Yeah. It's better than The King of Limbs. I'll say that. It's and I personally think it's better than Amnesiac. I think it's better than Hail to the Thief, Tom. As an album. I think it's better than Hail to the Thief.
Yeah, now, I would agree with that.
Now, I'm not willing to pick out I can't say that any of the tracks are better than any of the other, like, Radiohead's previous catalog of tracks. I can't say that yet. I just haven't had enough time with the album. I can't actually rank it in comparison to, like, In Rainbows or Kid A or OK Computer. I just know it's, like, at least almost at that level or not, or at that level.
Sure.
It's either approaching that level or at that level.
And I know you were worried about me hating it, and I think that you were right to, because at first that's kind of where I thought it would lead to as well. The thing for me is I actually the big deciding factor is this album going to pull me back?
Right.
And I don't think that it has that comeback quality, that allure, I would say, that a lot of their other stuff does. Even albums like Amnesiac and Hail to the Thief, which I don't necessarily consider to be their objectively stronger albums.
What I would argue, though, is that comeback quality, at least an observation that I would make kind of for myself as well, but really in getting to know you and your musical taste over the years, your comeback quality derives primarily by those killer tracks.
Yeah.
And when Radiohead goes into the studio and then comes out with an album listening experience that doesn't rely on like a few key tracks, what was the word that you used when describing some of the tracks on OK? Keystone tracks. You know, a Moonshaped Pool doesn't have keystone tracks. Maybe Daydreaming.
And see, for me though, Burn the Witch, Daydreaming, and True Love Waits are strong enough to make me come back.
Okay.
And everything, you know, those are the bookends. Right. Those are the bookends of the album. But those songs don't leave my head.
Yeah.
They haven't in the last 2 weeks. And honestly, some of the other tracks do too. I find Desert Island Disc. I find Identikit.
Yeah.
I find the numbers swimming around in my noggin every now and then. Thing,
we've only had this album for 2 weeks.
2 weeks, exactly.
And like from now, like I said earlier, the numbers right now isn't one of my favorite songs. Yeah. It has every reason to be one of my favorite songs, and it's just possible that it hasn't hit me yet.
So while knowing my tastes, it would make sense for me to not come back to this album much. Yeah. I already 2 weeks into it find myself thinking about these songs more than I ever thought about the tracks from In Rainbows. So I do see myself coming back to this album more than I came back to that one.
Yeah,
I think I will end up liking it more than In Rainbows.
That does not surprise me.
Okay.
I think there's more here for your listening experience.
But I still have some problems with it. I still think this is a masterfully crafted album, and this is a complaint I've said about other masterfully crafted albums. A couple come to mind that we reviewed. I make this comparison every now and then. PJ Harvey's Let England Shake and Fiona Apple's Idler Wheel.
Yeah.
Both incredibly good albums that never really reached a dynamic climax, and that bothered me.
Yeah, especially when there's a song that was poised to do it on the record that they didn't.
Right, with Full Stop. And that's the way it is for Moonshaped Pool for me. I think that one thing that bothers me about this is I think that they blow their load a little bit early with Burn the Witch. That is the most intense track on the album. Now, the mix gets a bit thicker on tracks like Full Stop and Identikit, and I really like those moments. But that doesn't mean that the intensity is really there. And I think Burn the Witch has that tension and intensity, that kind of cross section of the two, with the very staccato strings. That just, I love the feeling that song has. And then from there, it kind of drops down and it kind of simmers through the rest of the album. And this is a minor complaint. Once again, like, I mean, those...
I actually, if you didn't have Burn the Witch as the first track on the album, I don't think you include it.
What do you mean?
I think that it is the only place that it would fit is the first track.
I agree. I'm not saying they should have thrown that in the middle. I'm just saying if you're going to start with a track that sets a level of intensity, come back to it. Exactly. And they almost do it with Full Stop, but not quite.
You kind of wish
they almost do it with Identikit. And those tracks are great on their own, but in the flow of the album, if you look at it as kind of like a time versus intensity graph, it never reaches that again. And that's one thing I really would have liked to see, but it is a minor complaint because this album is just so well put together.
That's a really good point I had never considered before. And while I don't think that it bothers me quite as much as it does you, like I see where you're coming from. I really do.
Cool.
I don't have a lot more to say about this
No, me
record.
neither.
I am willing to say I love it.
Yeah.
But I expected to love it. I still love The King of Limbs, right? And that's one of Radiohead's weakest releases in recent times. So I mean, like they just don't know how to do bad music.
They're still reinventing themselves too. Yeah, they haven't stepped on their own toes within their discography.
And they will continue to do so.
Yeah.
But I think that for me, like, this has been a very rewarding experience. Just trying to figure out why I was getting the emotional reaction I was.
Well, they're continuing to make listeners challenge themselves, and that's completely commendable.
And isn't that what we want every band that we listen to do? If every band did this, if put this much professionalism and thought and strategy into how they craft, record, and release music, think about what the world of music could be like.
So So this is a good. Let's lead this into kind of a philosophical discussion on music at large. And I won't talk your ear off on this, Jake, but this is something I've been thinking about in conjunction with this album. We're dedicating like an hour-long podcast to this. We've listened to this, collectively dozens of times, and so is everyone else out there. I did not like this album on first couple listens, and now I am loving it. And it took me a lot of listens to get there, but I don't think anyone out there is giving this much attention to any other music. We listen to a lot of music, but we don't listen to any one album, dozens of times like we did this one. And I have to call myself out for that a little bit because it makes
our monthly wrap-ups, we're listening to like one or two times, and that's it.
Exactly. It forces me to question myself and say, is there other music out there like this that people just aren't giving a chance because it doesn't have the name Radiohead on it? And it also begs the question of, in today's world with very short attention spans and a sense of instant gratification, how is a band or artist supposed to achieve the level of success that Radiohead has done with music like this, that takes a lot of listens and is very dense and complex? Because I just don't think you can do it. I think they're going to get overlooked. Now, then again, Radiohead didn't start that way. They started with catchy guitar rock. And then they earned the status of making people need to listen to their albums dozens of times.
I'll pick out two albums to answer you.
Okay.
One, Lost in the Trees, A Church That Fits Our Needs, came out in 2012.
Yeah.
I think is masterful. It's very Radiohead-esque, but more acoustic-based. And took at least 5 listens for me to even realize how awesome it was. Yeah. And then once that wave of realization hit me, I was just in love and had to pick it apart.
And you'll notice that album was criminally overlooked.
Yeah. Another record, I would say, is criminally overlooked. Have a Nice Life's The Unnatural World. One of our favorite records from all of our years reviewing music.
Easily.
And completely overlooked because who cares about Have a Nice Life? No one knows who they are. Okay. Completely overlooked, yet they've made genius music. Tom, I'm going to call you out. I think some of your albums are genius, but nobody knows yours.
Maybe subconsciously, that's why I get on a soapbox about stuff like this. Because it's like, how are you supposed to grab people's attention with music like this that is as intellectual as it is emotional? Right. Like it's dense and complex, and it's not attention grabbing enough to warrant that.
That is why what everyone needs to do is start reviewing music.
Because, that's true.
Seriously,
if you force yourself into that frame of mind, you'll find a lot more.
I want everybody to review music. I really do. I think everyone should approach. If you really love music, if you find yourself telling people that one of your favorite things is music, then you need to start reviewing it. And I don't care how you review it. I don't care if you do a podcast, or if you do video reviews, or if you do blogs, or if you even publish anything.
Just write your thoughts in a Word document or a journal.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's all you need to do, because it will force you to think critically. It will also force you to keep up with modern music, with the onslaught of albums that are released every Friday. And you'll go through them. You'll the process that, Tom, we are forced to go through as quasi music reviewers is A, intense, and B, rewarding in the fact, because every once in a while, I feel like every year we find one or two gems.
Oh yeah, it always happens,
and it's those gems that keep me doing this. It's those gems that make me realize this is why I do this. It's to find those diamonds in the rough.
Every year since we started reviewing music, we've found at least 2 albums that become one of my favorite albums of all time. And every year without fail, they're out there, people.
You just
they
gotta
are
go find
out
them.
There. Yes,
and it's just that Radiohead has earned the clout, earned the reputation very early on, while they had everyone's attention grasped already, and now just every single release is just one of the best albums of all time, just one of the greatest records of the decade. And so they don't need to put out many albums in a decade, because it just dilutes themselves, right?
Sure.
They'll just release 1 or 2 a decade and call it good. Tom?
Yes.
I don't know what else we could possibly say about Radiohead.
I think we've talked it to death, man.
We've really made 3 podcasts, a tripodcast of content about Radiohead. Oh man, from their early years to their 2000, early 2010 work, and now this last podcast, A Moonshaped Pool, their 9th record. I don't know what else we could say about this band.
No. We've said a lot.
They're my favorite band, and probably always will be, for all the reasons and all the things we just talked about. So before we went on this tirade of Radiohead,
Thai Radiohead.
Thai Radiohead. We're going on the Thai Radiohead. We're gonna do a post rock genre deep dive. But now the month of May is is wrapping up, so we got to do the monthly wrap up.
This
for May.
post rock deep dive keeps getting the boot. We'll bring it back sometime.
I'm thinking in June we should release this post rock deep dive. So that's coming. Just so you know that we are still intending to do that, and we're actually really excited about it because both Tom and I are big post rock fans. But we also gotta do our due diligence and keep up with new music. So monthly wrap up is probably the next podcast you'll hear from us. Thank you guys for your continued support and participation with Velocities of Music. Tom and I love all of your comments on our YouTube videos, Facebook messages, and emails. Your participation is what makes Velocities of Music possible. So, as always, thank you for being awesome. I'm Jake.
I'm Tom.
We are Velocities of Music, moving music discussion forward.